Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast for agency owners, hosted by agency veteran and coach Steve Guberman. Agency Bytes is a podcast focused on delivering actionable agency information from agency experts in about 25 minutes. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast for agency owners. I'm Steve Guberman from Agency Outsight, where I coach agency owners to build the agency of their dreams. Today, I'm talking with Ann Green, the CEO of G&S Business Communications, where she taps her 30 years of experience in integrated marketing communications to ensure excellence across all areas of agency performance and operations, from client service to the agency's integrated offerings to cultivating a vibrant, growth-oriented culture. Ann was previously president and CEO of Cooper Katz and Company, an award-winning agency she helped to build for more than 2 decades before it was acquired by G&S in 2018. You recently became CEO, Ann, and I'm excited to hear how that's been going. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Steve. Steve and I, we made a connection recently. It's been great, and I'm excited to have a conversation. I always love talking about running agencies. There's never a dearth of things to discuss.
Never. It's a good word, dearth. I want to talk real quick before I ask you, kind of take us through some of your trajectory to where you are now, because I think it's super impressive. But we met at the airport because I was sitting with my brother. We were heading out for a ski trip, and I was complaining about a referral that I had botched. And you were just like, in my perspective, you had like my vibe, because I would have done the same thing. Ann was sitting next to me at the table, and she overheard and she said, "Listen, I wasn't eavesdropping, but I own an agency. Here's my card." And I just thought that was just the coolest thing. And it's something I totally would have done. And so we've since met in person, and now we're here. And I love those interactions. And I'm curious, like, is that normal for you to kind of put yourself out like that? Is that your personality?
I'm so glad you took it that way, in a good way, which is...
of course. Yeah.
And it's interesting. We're about to do a session for all of our staff internally about networking and really what's demystifying it and networking in the wild, and no matter what age you are and stage. And I think one of the things that you learn over time, I guess if you're lucky, at least this is my journey, is that you just realize that you enjoy people. And I don't enjoy people all the time. Sometimes I don't enjoy them at all, like most of us. But I really do. I mean, we're in a people-oriented business. We're here to be counselors, to solve problems. A lot of us just really enjoy it when we get in a room together and hash things out. So I think I've learned over the years, especially the last 10 years, to just really enjoy making connections and contacts. But I will say, Steve, that I didn't want to be eavesdropping because that's so rude, but you're in like the club thing and you guys were there and it was interesting. And some of what you were saying was so in the pocket for me. I was just working out a referral agreement with someone who was referring business like literally that week.
Yeah.
And so, and I felt for the situation you were describing, and I thought, and I debated because I was there for a while and I debated, like, should I say anything? Like, what a weirdo. But I think ultimately I feel the way you did, which is like, what do I have to lose? He seems cool. These guys, like, if they don't want to connect, he won't. And, you know, I tried to be smooth about it. I ended up dropping my card and having to pick it up and giving to you like, oh, here you go. But it was fun. And I was like, oh my God, I hope they weren't annoyed. But you and I had such a nice connection. We had a great coffee. We have a lot in common. There's new things to learn. So yeah, I want to, that's, I guess, a joy. Like, there's a lot of pressure that comes with a CEO role and being an agency owner. I'm one of 8 owners of our agency. So I'm in an ownership team, but you hope for the fun stuff too. And one of the fun things is doing this and making connections and then seeing where you can help each other.
Yeah. Oh, I love when somebody puts themselves out there and it turns into something, and there's an opportunity to be supportive or helpful or make a connection. Or, you know, I go into a coffee shop and I'm like, who are all these people and how do we, hold hands, or like, I want to know. So I love that you did that. It just it hit a good spot with me. So thank you.
Well, and it's funny because as an agency leader, and you know, me, just for your listeners, because there's a lot of different types of agencies, and you were a creative agency head, right? So I run an integrated marketing communications agency. I came out of PR, but whether you're advertising or creative or digital, you know, wherever you're situated, we live on curiosity and we live on enthusiasm. I mean, one of the reasons I came into this role and stayed in this field my whole career basically is because I just love to learn stuff and I'm so curious and I like to meet people and it's so interesting. So I've never been the kind who's like too cool for school. In fact, when I've had team members over the years that try to be super blasé and cool about things, I remember Lin-Manuel Miranda, the one, who wrote Hamilton, A Million Things. He talked about having no chill. And I feel like that a little bit too, because I get really enthusiastic. So yeah, I don't have a problem kind of putting myself out there that way. And I think people need to know that that's okay, because having the energy, like you're saying, like who's here? How do we make a connection? I think that's a wonderful way also to be a human being, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think as a leader of a people-oriented business, your people are your most valuable asset. And so how are you connecting with them? How are you inspiring them? How are you demonstrating what leadership is like? And that's just part of what your job is. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. So talk about what it's been, this transition for you. You went from 30, now you're 130 in this new role. How's it been?
Yeah, so I'm an accidental business person, CEO. I thought, I came out of a liberal arts background, was going to go be a professor, but I wanted to work started at Burson Marsteller in the early 90s when it was the largest PR agency in the world. So I got to meet and work with Harold Burson, and there were legends there. And we had a creative department with the AP wire. We had newsrooms. We had one guy had access to the internet back in the day. For those of us who are old enough to remember this, like, I need to see the World Wide Web. My client's competitor is on that somewhere. Yeah. So I did go to grad school, and started to get a PhD in literature because that was really my passion, which I still love. But these two senior folks at Burson went and founded Cooper Katz. And I said, I'll go freelance and help them out. And it was the typical thing where if you're just open to stuff unfolding, 22 years later, we had built a $6 million agency, about 35 people. I was a CEO. I was an owner. Unfortunately, one of our founders passed away of cancer. So that was a journey to take everyone through. But then we sold to GNS in 2018 because we'd known the CEO there and his predecessor for years and years through the PR Council. I mean, one of the things, and I know you're very active in industry bodies too, is being involved in industry groups, whatever it is, if it's ad council stuff or advertising groups or PR council, that was incredible relationship builders. So we knew them and we knew there'd be a fit. But you're right, Cooper Katz was about 35 or so at our biggest. GNS was, 130. And now we have about 140 people after going through the journey of COVID. And it's about 6 years now in July. Wow. So that to me was an opportunity. I could have taken Cooper Katz over from the surviving co-founder, Ralph Katz, who's amazing, who's about 22 years older than me. But I really wanted to have what GNS had at the time, which was more scale and integrated services. We've all been blending into each other's fields for years, which can be both helpful and confusing, especially for clients. But we at GNS had a full creative team, and that was something Cooper Katz had because one of our leaders ran the creative services department at Burson Marsteller. So we always had creative, even when we were small. Yeah. We have a digital team. We have a full paid media team. Now we have project managers. And so I think for me, it was a chance to try leadership at scale. It was a chance to go into a new ownership group. I was the first one at GNS to not be homegrown within the ownership group. So that was a big chance for them and for me. So that was learning leadership in that collaborative matrix style. And then having more integrated services and seeing how do we deliver them, because it's always hard, right? Because it's always like, what are you doing? These different roles, it's hard to be in each other's shoes. Yeah. So there's always that moment of like being amazing and there's moments of trying to make it work. So yeah, that in a nutshell is kind of that big pivot for me. And it's been a great learning curve the last few years. It's been hard sometimes, but really good.
How do you define your personal leader style? I think you're very warm and empathetically driven and open. I mean, how do you define yourself as a leader?
It's funny. I subscribe to Harvard Business Review management tip of the day because, I'm like, well, at least I'll get one tip each day. I'll see what they have to say. And their tip today was like 3 leadership styles, but it came from an article that they just published on the platform called 6 Distinct Leadership Styles. And it was interesting to see how they categorize it because really that's what we do as humans. We try to categorize and understand things and put it in buckets and stuff. And so I was looking at them and there was one that was like more authoritative or coercive, which you need to use under crisis, or there was like compassionate or collaborative. And I had just started to read it and I was like, where do I fit in here? Do I share this with others? Because whatever rubric, maybe it's helpful.
Yeah.
I guess I would say that I'm a very matrixed leader, as in I know when we need to break apart and get stuff done, but I also know how important it is to bring people back together and communicate effectively. So I do think, I was saying, my predecessor here, Luke Lambert, who was amazing, he kind of ushered GNS over his decade plus into an era of independence, because a lot of the agencies back in the day were very top down managed. That's the way it was.
Yep.
Burson certainly was. So he kind of ushered everyone into an era of independence where, run in your lane, I trust you. I have defined my moment as interdependence, meaning that we need to be in collaboration with each other because there's too much going on. There's too much interdependency. There's too much crazy stuff happening. We have to move fast. So I kind of show it's like, come together, split apart, come together, split apart. And I've also been trying to institute more ways in which we can communicate with each other and keep each other. You don't want to overload with email, but use Microsoft Teams, like bring more of our leaders together to be like, guys, this is going well. This is going bad. This is happening here. And I really, though, I think the biggest thing for me is I'm really not territorial or defensive. I just love to work with other people. And I have my moments, where I can get prickly, but mostly I just really like to run side by side with people and give clear direction, so that there's a whole bunch of stuff, but I feel like leadership style. I mean, how would you define yours, Steve? I'd be interested in how you would answer that question.
It's interesting because I haven't felt like I've been in a leadership role in 5 years. And and that leadership role ended up being totally micromanaged. So I even in that case, I didn't feel like I had any agency or authority or ability to operate. So, gosh, I don't know. But I also know I've been relearning what it means to be a leader and not necessarily head of a team or head of a company or head of whatever, but as an individual of a person. And I think I try to live a courageous and impactful and intentional leadership role in how can I be of service? How can I be of help? How can I show up properly for somebody? Properly is kind of a subjective term, but so I think I also lead with my heart. Even thinking back to when I had my agency, anytime I stepped in it, it was with the right intention, but bull in a china shop on how I interacted with my team for the first few years until I learned oh, you're not just a guy with being a designer, you have people that you're responsible for now. And you have to behave differently and accordingly. And so I learned a lot in that time.
That's a big moment of learning, I think, in the normal growth curve in our industry. And also, whether you're corporate side or agency side, but especially in the agency side, you have people who are, and I'm talking about maybe more junior in the progress than what you were talking about as an owner and, ultimate leader. But this thing about what is that leader level voice and how it modulates from when you're, first of all, when you're more junior and you're like one of the guys, we're all together here, right? And management is really them. And the them might be super nice, but it's still us and them, and they're them, and what they're doing and why they're doing it is very opaque. And it's, as much as they try to explain, again, you could have a very top down group that doesn't tell you anything. Or you could have a group that's really trying, but it may not always land because you don't have the big context. I joke about looking through a piece of Swiss cheese, there's a hole here and a hole here, but the whole thing is not quite clear to you. But as you get older and you become a manager and you become more senior, your voice starts to take on more weight, but I don't know if everyone's aware of that yet. So that modulation between, and it doesn't mean you're just parroting what the leadership says. It's more like you're seeing yourself in that guise of, we're trying to achieve something here and I have messages to share and I'm being really intentional in how I'm talking to you. And as I talk to you and as I talk to the team, I'm myself, but I'm also recognizing I've got the kind of leadership of the agency on my shoulders too. And so that's a nuance of development at the more senior level that I find really interesting because it's tricky, I think.
You mentioned us versus them, and I think you were referring to leadership versus everyone else in the agency, but I also know you talk about that as it relates to the agency and clients and those relationships. Talk about what is that and how does viewing that relationship differently, help the agency?
Yeah, it's such a good, and frankly, I'm thinking about it a lot right now too, because of the environment and climate we're in, just as people. It's an election year. And what I've tried to say to our team is it's going to be very convenient for many forces out there to sow discontent and discord and to let individuals know it is us versus them, to convince us that there's a them that is trying to take something away or harm us. It's very, very convenient. There's a lot of players out there, and now they're AI enabled, which is like, oh my God, this is a steep and scary learning curve, Steve, that we're in right now. So I do translate it back. So I'm trying to say to everybody on that side, I'm going to ask a lot of all of us, our better angels, the grace we give each other, because we have to be counselors for our clients on this because they're in the crosshairs. But bringing it back down to earth, because this is like way top of mind, there's always that human predilection to us versus them. So it could be somebody, we call them market communicators, like the account side is what we call it, like the day-to-day client person. That's like, why are they doing that on the project management team, or why our creative team may be like, why don't they understand like that we didn't have this deadline? Why aren't they fighting with the client? Like, why are they siding with the client on this? That happens all the time, especially as we're working across our specialties and our disciplines. So it takes tremendous presence of mind to resist that thinking. And then it easily translates to the client. I mean, and for clients to agency.
Yeah.
It's so easily you fall into what are they doing? Don't they understand? And the trust thing. And I think I try to interrupt that in myself and others. It's kind of like interrupting bias. You have to be like, what is my thought train right now? Because what I try to remind folks of is we don't know what's happening on the client side. We don't know what pressure's under. We're not in their inbox. We don't know what's coming at them. And we have to help them understand and remain open and compassionate to our lived experience. But I hear it even like you'd get a bunch of managers together and talking about, like, say, a new policy and talking about general staff. And I'll hear people say, well, don't they understand where I'm like, no, they don't, because they're not running this agency. They're not sitting here in this seat. Like they've never, they don't know. So no, they don't. So I don't know if this resonates with you, but I feel like interrupting that train of thought wherever it happens in my personal life or in the business world is always a better outcome, because it brings heart and compassion first, and it breaks down crap and it builds trust. I don't know. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, fully. Just in the sense of trying to think, let's say you're driving and there's that person that's on your butt. You don't know why they're in a hurry. The perspective is you're being a jerk. The reality is they might have something we don't know anything about, and you know, change person in traffic to person in line at the bank, or I don't know if people still sit in line at banks, but like any other circumstance where we don't know what somebody's going through, and how do I take pause and say, have some compassion. They've got things, everybody's got something going on that we don't know about. They've got something presently or historically, we don't know. So yeah, how do you take pause and give that like sense of compassion for wherever people are?
I love that. Yeah. I love that example because it brings a very common example that's just in lived experience that lets you kind of check yourself there and bring that back into who you are in the business context, especially when you're in a multi-stakeholder environment. You have teams, you have clients, you have partners, you have stakeholders within an organization. Yeah. And I've had that experience too, where you're just going through some personal tough stuff in the last few years. As everybody has stuff, right? Everybody, this can be applicable to anyone. Yeah. I was really lucky in that moment because when I was sort of in a crisis moment, trying to deal with a family crisis, it kind of broke open compassion in me, because I needed help from so many people. Like I needed the guy to please notarize this thing, and I needed help from the FedEx guy, and I needed the bank guy to be nice to me, and I just needed like human help and kindness. And every time someone was, it just made me so filled with gratitude. But it also made me really break open in terms of, I'd sit on the subway and look around to you're like, what are they going through? Like everyone's going through something. And it was sort of this moment of like radical compassion. And we can't live in that all the time.
Right.
But I do that thing in the car where I'm like, why is this person on my butt? And the thing that's always funny is I catch myself thinking that it's about me, that, oh, they're racing me. They want to, like, they're thinking something about me. And then I have to remind myself, they're not at all. They're just driving. And maybe that's just, they tailgate. That's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. And crazy that we're like, our first thought is it's about us, and we're not on anybody's radar. Like the world is just so much bigger than us as individuals.
Well, I feel that as a CEO too. It's a really weird position to be in, and you've been in leadership. And any of our partners, like I said, my leaders and the ones, our colleagues together. But at once, you have to keep two things in mind at one time. And I get teased because I always say two things are true at once. I just got teased about that today, which is true. It's true, though.
Yep.
But you have to at once hold space for the fact that everything you say holds a lot of weight, even small things. And you have to be really thoughtful. But on the other hand, you're not that important and everyone's not thinking about you all the time.
Right.
Because of being in that leader, whatever role it is, it could be client side, agency side, me, my role, anybody's, that title confers attention and an overweighted attention. And a lot of times you're like, but I'm just me. But you're not just you. You're also symbolic in that way and everything. But at the same time, you can't allow that to become a thing where, and this is true for me or any of my partners, where you're just like, oh, it's all about what I'm thinking. Because there's a whole universe happening out there. And all I can do is try to transfer stuff I hope people will take, ideas, lenses, advice. Sometimes I am directly intervening. Sometimes I'm just kind of putting stuff out there and hoping that it resonates and seeing what comes back to me. But that is a very human thing to be like, I'm in the center of all this somehow.
Yeah. Some agencies lean into that for the work that they do and the types of clients that they work with, and whether they say we only work with ethically sound businesses or be certified businesses, and all the work that we do centers around people-centric impact and things like that. Is that like a modality? I don't think that's the right word, but is that something that you guys lean into as a culture?
We really lean into understanding kind of who we are in our industry sectors. We have really broad industry sectors. And one of the ways we think about it is, what are these businesses that are really having a massive impact, that are very much changing the world, that have outsized impact on so many aspects of life? And then, so that's one of the ways that we're very in touch with our purpose. It's interesting too, because with this new wave of technology, I think every organization that's a service, or really every organization, has to get in touch with what is it that we do that's special or important.
Yep.
We have some, I'm very into a generalist mindset because I've worked in so many industry sectors, but I also really enjoy then going deep within some of them. So it's for me, if we can hit the sweet spot of being both generalists, but also specialists in certain categories and go super deep and stay focused on that purpose of really being in those human relationships with our clients, knowing that they have a higher purpose that they're serving in the world. Some of our clients are in agriculture. They're literally responsible for helping feed people, and at the broadest sense. Others are in other types of categories. But if we can do that and keep that sense of specialization too, then I think we can stay relevant as this massive technology shift happens, because there's going to be a lot of commodity and a lot of garbage out there. And there's going to be also a lot of awesome efficiencies and things that we don't want to be doing that we can do.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting time to kind of reconsider that very point you're asking, which is what is the purpose? What's the focus? And how do you help people understand what is it that we're doing here every day, which can be hard in an agency because we're here to service our clients. So you can get very focused on what their mission is. What is it that we are at the end of the day is important too.
Yeah. It's easy to get lost in all of the client missions and who they are. And if you think about how many agencies, Shoemaker's Kids, don't revisit their own culture, their own mission, vision, values, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And it's you got to revisit that stuff and be intentional with the internal, doings of the agency as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
If nothing more, just to protect your people and know that they are, following a path and not just haphazardly doing great work.
Yeah. And I said, I had a meeting earlier in January where we kind of went over what's our vision for the year and with leaders, and we cascaded it out, and I kind of went around and talked to all the different folks about it. I think on the agency side, there's a very specific business model. There's different flavors of it, but it's not a secret black box of how this operates. Some may be very focused on crisis or consultative or these kind of clients or this kind of business, but so I do think that makes it hard for folks to grasp, well, what's the strategy? What's our strategy? What's that secret sauce? So when people have anxiety around what's the strategy, it makes me want to unpack it to say, what are we really asking here? Because the business model is very clear, but how we manifest it and then how we go to market and how we think about those relationships, that's where you need to have more discussion and engagement.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. Like, what is the strategy? But when you're leaning on it too much and can't kind of think on your feet or, autonomously, that becomes almost a crutch. So I think that's a balance there.
Yeah. And really now too, with the world as volatile as it is, if you've got a 3-year plan, get ready to redo it,
Yeah.
It's very funny. We think about, well, what could happen? Like the last 5 or 6 years have certainly shown what can happen.
Yeah. I've never really been a fan of like that 3 or 5 year business model. Like certainly keep your eyes on that 3 years. Yeah. But like if you're not in the year and you talked about your kicking off that year vision. Yeah. If you're not in the year and 1 year ahead and bringing it down into the tactical day to day, month to month, week to week kind of thing. Yeah. You'll almost like trip on your own feet, but planning too far out, so much can happen. It's just not, if you think about like a general SWOT analysis, like the threats are massive these days. So
we just redid a SWOT analysis and the threats were quite interesting. Yeah. And I'm, it's very funny. We've all, you and I have been through in our arc of our time in this business, a lot of change. If we think about what you and I were both maybe doing at the start on the client side and what we're doing now, what agencies or creative agencies or others are doing, it's quite different. Very similar in some ways and very different in others. But it's funny to see like the arc of change and it's happening and also trying to stay balanced about it, right? So I don't love tech utopianism because I've worked in tech extensively across my career. And, we were doing, my last agency was one of the first to do blogs for companies. One of my colleagues who's now at another agency for years, he was literally in Business Week for launching blogs for businesses. I mean, it was so new. Yeah. And there was so much tech utopianism about the early days of social and the idea of writing to the web of TypePad and WordPress. Like that was revolutionary to not have to know HTML. But I think that utopian thing makes you blind to a lot of stuff. But I also don't like the tech dystopic side where, it's the Matrix and, the robots are going to kill us. I think we have to be really attentive to both energies. Like, and my attitude was, I remember training clients in the early days of social media because I always joke that no one has an existential crisis about an Excel spreadsheet. It's just a business tool, right? But you got social media in the mix and people have a lot of feelings, #feelings, many feelings. So I remember people trying to get me to say, oh, this is not good or it's not media or it's not that. I'm like, this stuff, social media, AI is just a reflection of us, and we can be utopia or garbage fire. That's what humans are. So I think one of the things of trying to do and having been around the block is you learn to be a little bit more balanced about it, to say there's a lot of threats out there. And some of them are some of the technology and geopolitical and stuff and climate. But then there's also a lot of opportunities if we don't get too panicked about X or Y and really trying to figure out how do we just make what we do better and bring more value. But these are big issues, but that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah. Well, they're big issues, but they affect everybody, and you've got 140 something mouths to feed plus all of their families. And so if you're not thinking about, and that translates down to somebody who's got 2 mouths to feed, you know what I mean? Yeah, like it's the same thing. And so if we're constantly hyper-focused on all of the potential threats, we're not focusing on what are the solutions, what are the opportunities ahead of us. And that's the benefit of that exercise, I think. But just in the general day-to-day of like, keep my eye focused on the things that I can control. My day-to-day activities of, outreach, hitting up clients, building relationships, making an impact, showing up for people, and whatever. If the world's going to end tomorrow, I know that today, like I've done the thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? So
it's very sage advice, and I think it's true. And that we are all, many of us in these kind of fields, very much about trying to control or trying to curate and shape and drive all the type A things. So having that balance of what is uncertain, I love to plan, and then know that. And COVID was a really good re-entry into that lesson, running a firm, being one of the owners before being CEO. But it was very much about plan. Like I always think of outcomes like there's a fan of possibilities from the most awesome to the most yuck. And there's all these things in the middle. So look at the whole fan and then say, okay, now we'll see.
Yeah.
So it's like hold less tightly. But you're prepared, but you have to hold less tightly as it unfolds and be ready to be nimble and change. And that's something I feel we've been working really hard on. I kind of talk about where do you have to build a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a muscle you have to build about being comfortable kind of being in the uncertainty, but then moving quickly to make decisions. I've been pleased about just our ability to kind of come together, bring a lot of points of view to the table. It's that interdependence thing again, bring a lot of points of view to the table, hash it out, and then like go forward. It's not always the perfect decision, but I feel like we're moving faster and smarter, which is nice.
As the leader, do you feel like that gives you enough of an air of confidence that do you think people look to?
I think so. I don't know. It'd be interesting. You'd have to ask my colleagues and partners about it. Yeah, I think that another leadership style is I'm very vulnerable and open. I think I learned a while ago at my last agency that in moments where you really make yourself vulnerable in a smart way, like it's not like you're falling apart, but and that's subjective too, but when you're vulnerable about, hey, this is my weakness, this is what I'm working on, and this is what I'm committed to doing as this person in this role, I've never really felt stronger and more supported than in that kind of moment. Like really people often will be like, wow, I really resonate with that. And I appreciate you being so open. Because I think a lot of times people just want transparency. They know they can't know everything, but just want to know what the hell's going on. They're just hoping people will be straight with them. It's so exhausting as a person to wonder what's the subtext, what's going on behind the scenes, what do they really mean? Yeah. And that's the normal energy in a corporate situation. You're always assuming, and that's why Dilbert was a very popular cartoon. You're always assuming the management's or work or Office Space is a movie. Yeah. You're always assuming they're up to something and there's some kind of subtext. So I think being vulnerable and being really open about what I know, I don't know, can stand side by side with projecting a lot of confidence and a lot of subject matter expertise. So I like that. I do feel right now I'm in a good space where people understand and feel confident, like Anne knows what she's doing, but they also know that I'm really open to growing and learning. And then the other thing I really want is that if there's something I'm misjudging or not understanding, or that I'm looking at it in a way that's not helpful, I really want people to be able to say, hey, you got to shift this. This is not, I think you're off base here. Yeah. Because if we can't have that conversation with each other, especially among the senior leadership, then you're really in trouble.
Sure. Yeah, you got to be able to have that kind of candor on all levels, but really you're not going to get that from a junior designer or, a social media intern or something like that, as you would middle to senior management to be able to come to you.
Yeah, people will be shy. Yeah. It's hard to, as much as you say, and one of the things I think that's really important in any organization today in the world that we're in is that ineffable yet so clear area of trust building. Yeah. So there's a lot of people that talk about trust. It's all over the place in the media. Clients of ours have had it as platforms. I think it's big in all aspects of, culture. It's also really important relative to greater inclusivity. Mm-hmm. As we look at, there's all of this energy around DE&I, and it's very convenient for people to create divisiveness, to tear people down. People really in our country do not want to contemplate our own history. There's just a lot of energy around there. I'm not that interested in it, but here, thinking about being more inclusive, which is really an amazing way to grow the business and have a team that's really strong, it really comes down to trust. Like, what are the barriers that are stopping trust? Is it bias? Is it the fact that you don't know what that manager's thinking, that there's power dynamics and system dynamics that are weird? Or is it just trust between teams, between different service areas, trust between the client and the staff? And so the more my attitude is I know not everyone's going to tell me everything, because they won't either telling me, hey, Anne, I think you're wrong, or this thing is wrong. Mm-hmm. But what I try to constantly say to everybody is I want to create an environment where you can tell someone and it's going to go up the chain. Yeah. Like if something is not wrong, if you feel like the client, because I also do a lot of training in ethics and ethical decision making. And so if you feel like you've been asked a weird question by the client, if you feel that there's been an uncomfortable incident, if you feel like something's wrong, if you feel like this process is wrong, tell somebody. And that to me is the ultimate dream, when there's a culture that is tight enough, and then the different levels of more senior leadership feel empowered to carry that up and know that they're going to be rewarded for speaking. It's really important.
The culture of it's okay to tell somebody because that'll get to the next person, and it's okay that these things get out and are communicated versus side conversations, and I'm sure that gossipy stuff happens anyway. You can't have that many people in it, but that there's open lines of communication in all levels, in all directions, and I think that's really valuable for the culture, and even just for the efficacy of the work that you're doing. The transfer of knowledge, and whether it's institutional knowledge or client, information. So I think that's super valuable. This has been amazing. I want to go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's really important client service too, because the most important thing we need to do is always do the very best work. Always ask ourselves every day, well, what's value for this client right now? Like, what does value look like? It's not just maybe in the program we built, maybe and bringing ideas and pushing. It's hard to keep that high bar all the time. And part of it, that high bar, is being willing to have lots of different conversations among different team members and move fast, of course, right? But also, be able to have more senior people who've been in the chair for years and can interpret interactions more to say, hey guys, like, I think we need, and then have younger people say, hey, I have a fresh idea here. I'm excited because we have 4 generations in this workforce right now at GNS and many other agencies. And I think that's freaking amazing, because the reason I love agency side and is all the learning and all the clients, all the people, but also it's like lateral and up and down and sideways learning all the time. And that to me is really like the best.
That's beautiful. The impact that you can have with so many generations, so many types of people with so many walks of life, and the diversity that's there. That's magic. I love that.
That's cool.
Amazing. And this has been a great conversation. I want to wrap things up with a couple of just random rapid fire questions, not related to agency, although they could be.
I'm ready.
What's something that you've been binging and can't get enough of, whether it's a podcast or a book or a show or anything that's in your life these days?
People will laugh, my colleagues. I'm so obsessed with Ezra Klein's podcast right now. I mean, it's not like nobody knows about him from the New York Times, but the conversations he has are so deep and smart. The stuff he's doing on AI, I'm just learning so much, the people he's having on, but also he's able to invite people on to have really deep, nuanced, thoughtful conversations on things like the conflict with Palestine and Israel, or what's going on in government, the elections and stuff. So I really can't get enough of the conversations he curates, because sometimes it's just hard to watch the news or read the news, but to listen to a podcast, an expansive conversation, even on hard stuff or even on stuff that's overwhelming, love it.
Makes it a little bit more digestible than reading headlines.
It makes me think. I just love it. And I love moving around my house, doing my chores, listening to a podcast.
What is it called?
Ezra Klein. He's the Ezra Klein Show. It's his podcast. He's in New York Times. He founded Vox.com. Yep. So he's a good one.
Great. What's a tool, not AI, that you've recently integrated into your life? It can be digital or physical, or a thing that you're like, how did I live without this thing in my life?
I finally became a member of the Apple Watch set. I'm showing you my Apple Watch. And again, I'm not always like the earliest adopter of certain things. I'm a pretty early adopter in many ways, but I had used a Fitbit for years. And the Apple Watch, I'm really trying to, as a woman of a certain age, optimize health and wellness and sleep and just be really holistic about it. And I like the Apple Health Kit. I have a friend who's in tech who just hates Apple. He's an Android guy, but I like the integrated side. And so I got it, and I was a little bit more delighted with it than I thought I would be. So I'm enjoying that.
Very cool. Yeah, I struggle with that, but I'm glad you're embracing it.
Yeah.
Finally, and this can be any walk of life, but what is just a super invaluable piece of business advice that you can share with agency owners?
Oh my God. I really am trying to, as sort of that type A hard driving agency person who's, a fun person too. I try to be and light, but I'm trying to take the advice that people give, which is like, you can't fill others' cups if your cup is empty, and that self-compassion. And one of my partners, but a number of my partners are really amazing in this, like on their own journeys about how do they feel fulfilled. We have a value called enjoy life. And I joke with the staff to say, I'm sure there are times you are not enjoying life, and, and like, let's not be fake about it. But I really think we're having a really wonderful dialogue at the leadership levels and down about what does it mean to be a whole person in a very challenging world and in a very challenging business. And I love that mutual support, so that's really great.
That's beautiful. It's a massive priority in my life. And I think it's something that's been overlooked in our industry for a lot of years. And I'm just so grateful that whether it's COVID or other things that have kind of brought it to the surface, leaders like yourselves are making it a priority. So beautiful.
Yeah. And right back at you, Steve, too.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you. I'm so grateful we met and that you spent some time with me on this podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in to Agency Bytes. If you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love to hear about, go to agencyoutsight.com/podcast-guest and nominate them.